It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present, and emerging of the land I'm standing on today. I extend my respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who listen to this. I wonder if you've been wondering, once Lee has started acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, what is he really talking about? Well, I'll let Mundanara first acknowledge country and then explain.
I'd like to acknowledge the Yuggera people, south of the Mardawa River, also known as the Brisbane River, here in Brisbane and Queensland, in this beautiful country now known as Australia. I'd like to also acknowledge the Turrbal people north of the Mardawa River. The Yuggera and the Turrbal people have been living and practicing their culture for tens of thousands of years. I want to acknowledge their elders past and present. And I also want to acknowledge traditional owners from right across the world, from wherever you're listening to this podcast. It's great to have your company. The Acknowledgement of Country is an ancient diplomatic protocol, a very important law that has been practiced by all Aboriginal peoples right across this country since time immemorial. As a non-Aboriginal person living in Australia, it's like an invitation for you to become part of the oldest living culture in world history. You can participate in our culture. You don't have to go to places like Uluru to immerse yourselves in Aboriginal culture. You can become part of our culture when you undertake the same obligations and responsibilities to this land as Aboriginal people have done for tens of thousands of years. The Acknowledgement of Country has got nothing to do with political correctness, because as far as I'm concerned, political correctness came in yesterday. We've been here for a lot longer than, how long, even reconciliation. Reconciliation came in yesterday as well, as far as I'm concerned. The welcome to country is very different. A traditional owner, so here in Brisbane, only a Yuggera or Turrbal person can welcome you to their country. But an acknowledgement, as an Aboriginal person, I am acknowledging that I am a visitor on the Yuggera and Turrbal lands that I live on and I work on and I raise my children here. So to see yourself as part of the oldest living culture in world history, that to me is a step in the right direction. And I think when people start to take on some of those obligations to country, to this land, that will ensure that our history stretches as far in front of us as it does behind us. So thank you.
Here's why I have started to acknowledge country. I want the story of our people and the people that came before them to live on in each acknowledgement I do. And my reasons aren't as important as, well, Mundanara will explain better.
The more you encourage people, right, to do an acknowledgement, the more you're encouraging them with anything that you get better at practice, right? But if they start with a little bit about themselves, right, or connect the acknowledgement of country with their own personal stories. So I said that my children, I live and work on Yuggera and Turrbal country, and I've had the privilege of raising my children on Yuggera and Turrbal country. So even though I'm not from here, my connection to this land is through my children. They were born here. So personalise the acknowledgement. It's not like, is there a wrong way? Is there a right way? I don't want to disrespect anyone. as long as you acknowledge, and if you can't pronounce the people, as long as you say, I acknowledge the traditional owners or traditional custodians of the land in which we meet, or the land that we're gathering on, and I acknowledge their elders past and present, that's fine. That's fine. If you want to take it to the next level and pronounce the traditional owners, make sure you do your homework so that you don't say the wrong people, because there could be people in the audience that go, hold a minute, this is not Yagara country. You're on the north side of the Brisbane River. This is Turrbal land. Do you not know where you are? So there's an app, Welcome to Country. I think it's WEL2 country, and it syncs with the GPS on your mobile phone, and it tells you wherever you are in Australia who the traditional owners are in that moment, where you're standing. Google it. If you don't know, Google it.
Before the arrival of British colonisers in 1788, Indigenous Australians were spread across the country with over 500 different clan groups or nations around the continent, many with distinctive cultures, beliefs, and languages.
Recently, I've been talking with a few really well-known podcasters with difficult to pronounce names. And it is really interesting because while I was growing up, my parents made sure that no one shortened my name. If someone would say Ron or Rons, they would correct them and say Ronsley. And you know what? Mundanara could relate.
If I want to be Mundanara or if I want to be Mara, there's two different names that I go by, right? Because I could not justify my cultural identity as a 13-year-old. I had no confidence, right? Being Aboriginal was not a good thing. If you wanted friends, I don't remember ever being invited to a birthday party. I never had. My first sleepover was in grade 8, and it was a white girl, and I was just like, to my family, man, I'm having a sleepover. And they're like, oh, okay. They'd never had a sleepover either. You don't get invited to people's house. You don't get invited to the birthday parties, right? You don't even think that that's an issue because that's just how it is. You don't even know why. You don't even go, oh, I'm Aboriginal, they're not going to invite me. As a kid, you don't even know that. And my parents didn't say, you know, that's because you're Aboriginal, right? Like, it's all good. You just get used to that. So Mara for school was much easier for me to just be, you know, not having to justify my cultural identity as Mara was like a breath of fresh air. People just accepted me. I fitted in. I was popular. But once I was Mundanara, right, it was like, so where are you from? Especially when I went to a new school. I knew already, don't you? I knew I was not Mundanara. I would go up to my teacher and cross the name out. I'm Mara. Don't say Mundanara. And they were like, thank goodness, because I don't even know how to say it anyways. So they didn't mind me crossing my name out. Do you know, Mundanara opens up a whole can of worms, right? Because it's like, so where are you from? Oh, I'm Aboriginal. Oh, you don't even look Aboriginal. Well, I'm Aboriginal. But you mustn't be a full Aboriginal. You must be just a part. Are you a half or a full? You're not a full. You must be a half or a part. Imagine as a 13-year-old and someone is telling you that you're not who you are. You can't be. You don't look like an Aboriginal. Well, what does an Aboriginal look like?
You gotta be yourself. And like, this is what works for me. And this is what, like, I do think, like, if I would allow myself to be any other way, I think it would fundamentally change who I am. And like, that's what scares me.
To me, I was never aware that we had to look a certain way. It was how I had lived my whole life. I had been socialized in a community, in an Aboriginal community like Redfern, right? That my whole growing up and the whole way I saw the world was through Aboriginal eyes. Cut long story short, Mundanara I only took back that name recently. I'm 36 now. I wasn't maybe 21, 22 that I started to go, hold a minute, no. I'm Mundanara, and if you can't say my name, then too bad, learn it. I don't have a short name. I don't let people, when they go, oh, what do we call you for short? Mundanara. And I want to laugh sometimes because, you know what, this is new for me to say, no, I'm Mundanara, because I am strong enough in my own cultural identity to take anyone on at any time. But why do I have to feel like every time I leave my house that I have to get ready to go to battle? Because someone, it's going to happen, whether it's in the first Uber, the second Uber, someone is going to question my identity. And that to me is fucked up. It's so fucked up because it's none of your business. Like, who are you to question my identity for people who think it's their business? Who are they to say, no, you're not who you are? Hold a minute, do we know each other? Have we met? Like, you're a complete stranger and you are asking me to justify my cultural identity. No, fuck you. So the TED Talk that I did was about why do white Australians, because just remember, people, the white Australia policy up until the 60s in this country was in full swing. You could not become an Australian citizen if you was a non-European. It was about keeping Australia white, right? The national anthem, Advance Australia Fair. Do you think it's about fairness and a fair go? It is about whiteness. Advance Australia into whiteness.
For those who come across the seas, we've boundless plains to share. With courage let us all combine to advance Australia fair.
The story that has shocked me and everyone else that I've told this to since I heard Mundanara tell it is this one. Please be advised, this is not easy to listen to, just like a lot of the truth. But this needs to be heard.
What we're talking about is systemic racism. It's not individual acts of racism, people, all right? We you become desensitized. You can be called, oh my God, being called a half caste, quarter caste, part Aboriginal, coon, boong, the N-word. My daughter, 14, at a private school, when George Floyd passed and the Black Lives Matter, the protests happened in the US, her friends at a private school here in Brisbane, her friends, one of them said, well, he was just a nigger. My daughter, being Fijian Aboriginal, is very dark. She said, you cannot say that. You cannot say the N-word. And she's referring to a dead man. Everyone saw how he died. And this young 14-year-old privileged white kid says that he was just a nigger. And no remorse. No, there was no feeling of, oh, actually, that was very insensitive. That was highly inappropriate. And no one pulled her up except for my daughter, because my daughter was the only person of colour. And my daughter said, you can't say that. It's so inappropriate. You just cannot say that. And she says, well, I'm not calling you a nigger. My daughter came home and she just cried. She says, I just hate that school. I said, no. That's just one individual. And you know what? Doesn't matter what school you go to. You live in a society that was built and founded on racism, right? White superiority. They saw that their culture and society was more civilized than our culture and society. I said to her, we live in a racist society, and racism has become normalized. So that behavior here in a school, 2 months ago, a 14-year-old little privileged white kid saying, oh, he was just a nigger. But none of the other girls had the confidence to say, hey, that's not okay. No one spoke up. My daughter's one of 20 Aboriginal kids out of a school of about 2,000. A very privileged private school here in Brisbane. There's probably 3 private schools here in Queensland, prestigious private schools. And for my daughter to even, to go to a private school, I knew she was going to have challenges, but I went to 14 different schools. We dealt with racism and discrimination in every single school. That's why my mum and dad kept moving us. 14 different schools. So I said to my daughter, if you want me to move you, I'll move you. But this is the best school. You're going to get the best education, the best support. And one day, the people that you're connecting with and building friendships with, they're going to be people in high society. They're going to be people that you might need to call on later on because you just went to school together. So for me to put her into a school like that and for her to have to just suck it up and deal with that as a 14-year-old, that breaks my heart.
When we come back, how can we use all this in the real world, especially in the workplace?
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
The main objective of this audio project is to bring together entrepreneurs and creatives who share similar values so that they can find the courage to put out their authentic voice for the right people to hear, which allows for them to make their impact on the world. Every great movement started with a memorable speech. For access to full-length interviews, go to psychologyoфentrepreneurship.com and click the button.
Sometimes I think it's important to be specific about what we are actually after. For example, I would love you to tell more people about this show, especially if you feel like they can contribute to the conversation or just need to hear a conversation to have a deeper one with themselves. I also do this show because of the people I meet and the relationships that build over time, especially with the people you work with.
Relationships take time. We need to give that time. We need to put it in the agenda, relationship building. In the corporate world, right? Go into a meeting and flip the script. Introduce yourself to your own team members. Who you are. You're a mother, you're an auntie, you're a grandmother, you're a businesswoman, you're a basketball coach on Saturdays, you're a dog lover, whatever it is that makes you you. Because what happens in the workplace, Ronsley, is that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And 30% of people that have quit their jobs in Australia, this is some research done by the Business Council, the BCA, 30% of people that have quit their jobs was due to direct conflict with their managers. All the reasons you could quit your job, 30% came down to they didn't get along with their manager, right? Because there was no relationship. So how do we bring up a society where young people, right, can turn up and be their full selves? They turn up and they don't have to leave their Aboriginality at home or their cultural identity at home. They don't have to leave that at home to come into the Western world to participate and to be accepted and to be included and to be celebrated. They can bring their full selves to work. That we have a long way to go in that sense, right?
Most of my work is focused on building up that internal strength and resilience that's already there, but how do you build on that so that the leadership of First Nations not only looks after their own people by keeping them feel safe and with a strong sense of belonging, but is able to work across in the Australian context with all other Australians in order to achieve what we need to achieve together. We're at a community level, at government, programmatic level, or in a business sense, to be able to kind of do some innovation that works on the horizons that we haven't seen yet. You won't be able to do that as First Nations if you're not strong in and of yourself in terms of your own identity and belonging and your own cultural resilience that you will need as an individual.
I think the younger generation in Australia, we have for the early learning centres, so little preschools, daycare centres, there's the early learning years framework. And in the early learning years framework, there's Indigenous knowledges and perspectives embedded in the framework. So little people, like 3-year-olds, are learning the acknowledgement of traditional owners. That is a protocol, a very important diplomatic tradition that has been practiced in this country for tens of thousands of years. And little people are carrying out that important business.
Here is what I would love you to understand. Concepts that are as old as life, which have been explained better because they have been told and retold from one generation to the next, are concepts that are easy to hear when they're told by other people.
Relationships are core to Aboriginal society and Aboriginal culture. We invested in relationships, right? Because it minimizes, and there's many other reasons, but it minimizes the potential for conflict. So how do we build relationships? This is where it all starts for young people, for people like you and I, for older people. How do we build a relationship? Because once we build a relationship, you'll find as human beings, we have a lot more in common than we do have differences. We have a lot more in common, right? I met with about 8 architects the other day. It was a pitching presentation, right? And I'm on the project team. Man, you think these architects at a university, they didn't know what was coming for them. I got up. They wanted to make sure that this whole project had Indigenous engagement from the get-go. Amazing. This is benchmark. We're setting a benchmark here on how any organisation in this country, when you want to develop land, go and engage with the Indigenous people, the traditional owners, and have them on board and let them tell you about that land and the significance, whether it should be developed or not. So here I am, I get up and I do the acknowledgement, and then I say, I'm now going to introduce myself in Aboriginal terms of reference. My name is Mundanara. I'm a Gungaloo Birigubba woman on my father's side. I'm a Wanneroo Bunjalung woman on my mother's side, born and raised in Redfern, in the heart of Sydney. 8 sisters from the block. First generation that wasn't forcibly removed, but 5 generations. All of my mother's grandmothers connected to Redfern, right? So Redfern is very special to me, even though I live in Queensland. I've got 5 children. They love basketball. They love football. My daughter does gymnastics. My husband's a Kiwi-born Fijian, so we go for New Zealand sometimes in the rugby. Then we go for Fiji. Sometimes we go for Australia, but we usually go for Fiji or New Zealand. And our kids at home speak bits of the Fijian language. They know how to say hello and thank you and please and goodbye. They speak bits of my mother's language, and we speak English as well. They know a lot of the Māori language. So my kids are very proud Aboriginal Kiwi Fijians. Then this man does his introduction. I said, this is how we're going to introduce ourselves, because Aboriginal people have been doing this for tens of thousands of years. This is how we can get to know each other. We can build trust. And we are more than our job titles. We are much more than our job titles. Then this man says, wow, this is interesting. I'm from Rockhampton and I've worked at UQ. Then I said, wow, my grandmother was born in Rockhampton and my grandmother's sister worked at UQ. Do you know Lilla Watson? Of course I know Lilla Watson. I would not have thought in a million years I'd have anything in common with this man. The next person, she says, I'm from Rockhampton too. He says, really, they work together. They've been in the architecture industry, working in that profession for years, and they did not even know that their families were both from Rockhampton.
Data from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare shows that in 2016, Indigenous Australians aged 15 to 64 were 1.9 times as likely to not be employed compared to non-Indigenous Australians. There are many factors that contribute to this, including lack of education, training and skill levels, poorer health, discrimination, and lower levels of job retention, most of which are a direct result of the way that Indigenous Australians have been oppressed throughout the history of white Australia.
I would love a world with no separations, no boxing of humans to generalize, and the only reason to stereotype is if you are doing stand-up comedy and using the obvious to make people laugh. And a world, most importantly, that has all the colors present.
If we're going into workplaces and if you are recruiting, especially Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, build a relationship with them. Because what happens is people start to relax. And when you relax, people can think better, more clearly. And they will thrive. They will kill it in the job interview. So I think our young people, right, growing up especially in Australia, but all around the world, their stories need to be valued. Their cultures need to be valued, right? Not have them justify who they are and where they come from, but to embrace who they are and where they come from, and to celebrate who they are and where they come from, and say, that's the kind of person we need in our organisation. You want to talk about diversity and inclusion, which nearly every organisation has a policy around. Well, yeah, we've got the diversity, right? But do we feel included? Do you see people of colour in management, executive roles or on the board? Do you see females in executive roles or on a board? So I just want to say that, what we've kind of lost, not we as an Aboriginal person, but the Western world, is we've lost the value we place on relationships and the value we place on people. Because once we start talking about who we are, like I said, we start building this relationship, we start building trust, it just reinforces our humanness. So let's bring up children in a society where they're valued, their culture, their identity, their religion, whatever way they go, if they belong to the LGBTIQ is part of a society, embrace that. Right? But if we don't invest in relationships, then we miss out on that connection that we need in society, that human beings need. When you look at Aboriginal Australia and the hundreds of different countries that spoke hundreds of different languages, there was never an invasion in this country. No one ever invaded their neighbours. But in world history, it is normal. But in Aboriginal society over 140,000 years, even though a lot of these different countries, different Aboriginal people, we couldn't understand each other. They spoke completely different languages. We may have had conflicts, right? But it wasn't over land or territories, right? Never over land. It may have been over insults, breaches of protocol, breaking the law, women stealing. So how you get on with your neighbours, just like Aboriginal people have done for tens of thousands of years. We had a stable, efficient society, not about peace and harmony. That's not true. It wasn't peaceful. All right? There was fights, there was conflict, there were disputes, but it was managed and conflict was given a place.
With all the information I have presented you over the last few volumes, I wanted to leave you with context. Context is everything. Perspective makes you better informed. Better informed allows you to ask better questions. So listen, understand, and listen some more before you start asking questions and offering solutions. I also would like to acknowledge the people that came before me, that build the platforms, that have allowed me to have this voice, that have given their lives so that I can have this freedom. I want to acknowledge you. and I want to acknowledge everyone that is doing what they can to make the world a fair and equal and lovable place. Here is Mundanara telling a story of the most visible feature of Aboriginal culture.
One of my clients that I work with, and I won't name them, I walked into one of the branches and I saw the Acknowledgement of Traditional Owners sticker on the front glass. So I walked into the branch and I said to the teller, I said, I just wanted to know about the sticker on the front door. She goes, the Wi-Fi sticker. I said, no, next to the Wi-Fi sticker, there's an Acknowledgement of Traditional Owners. Like, I've never seen that before, and I've been banking with you, all my life. I said, what's that about? And she says, I think we're just acknowledging the landlords. It was at Robina Town Centre, one of the widest places on the Gold Coast. And they're acknowledging the people who own Robina Town Centre. And I just went back to the client. I'm like, it was like mystery shopper. I was going in there undercover. I didn't mean to do it. I just thought I would go and ask, do you know why that sticker's on the front door? And if you don't know, then pull the sticker off. So the Acknowledgement of Country is the most visible feature of Aboriginal culture today. It's in email signatures. It's on web pages. QUT, one of the biggest universities in Queensland. You scroll down the bottom of a QUT web page, you'll see the Acknowledgement of Country on every single web page. So we're speaking it, we're reading it, we're writing it. It's on websites, it's in emails, right? It's on the front of branches in banks. It's in Telstra stores. The acknowledgement to me is the most, it's the most visible aspect of Aboriginal society, of Aboriginal culture. So it used to be Aboriginal art, but now the acknowledgement's taken over. But a lot of the time I'm finding that even though it's the most visible feature, it's still misunderstood or not quietly understood, not communicated across to people to understand the why. I'm pretty sure now that people will feel much more confident and much more comfortable because they'll see, okay, so it's not just about Aboriginal people. This is about all of us that live in this country. How can we be part of the oldest living culture in world history? Now, that has to be a good thing.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
I'm a black person navigating white spaces, but I have privilege and I use that privilege in good ways. And I really have to say this, and that we are not meant to do life alone, that we are not meant to know how to do all of the things. Some of us, there were just things we were not taught as children. Most of us were not taught about money and how to manage money. And more people are standing up for what's important to them, and it's going to take all of us dismantling every single brick. It's ongoing work.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Mundanara because Mundanara Bayles is the managing director and co-founder of Black Card. She co-founded Black Card with Dr. Leah Watson, who is a respected Aboriginal elder, artist, educator, and longtime course developer. She also founded Deadly Futures, an event designed to provide opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons seeking employment, including further education opportunities. She has more than 18 years of experience working for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations in Queensland and New South Wales. She has an amazing TED Talk that you just have to watch. Mundanara is a mother, entrepreneur, and a proud advocate for her people.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bunnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research and content by Claire Gould and Corinne Castles. Project managed by Kaylee Bunnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Hey, it's Kaylee from Must Amplify. I'm the sound engineer for this volume of Psychology of Entrepreneurship. I'm part of the team that made this production come alive. I work as a part of a global team with our studios based in West End, Brisbane, Australia. If you would like a podcasting checklist, email me at kaylee@amplifyagency.media. That's KAILI@amplifyagency.media. We specialize in finding your voice and making sure it's heard by the right people. If you are considering whether a podcast is a good idea for your business, check out our other show on shouldistartapodcast.com.